Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devon Decker, and joining me, my host companion, current Poobah Frazier, and guy who's gonna vamp while I do something extremely ill-advised and stupid, Sejohn Sarowick. Sejohn?
Hey everybody. So I don't often do this, but because I'm given the opportunity to vamp, I'm gonna run down some stuff that's been going on in the background that we don't, there's a lot of things that fall through the cracks whenever we meet up because we can only talk for like 2 hours. Well, we could talk forever. We choose to only talk for about 2 hours every week, so that we're not completely like destroying your air balls. But because of that, there's things that happen throughout the weeks that we don't always get to. And there's been so much of that stuff going on this end. Because with holidays and things like that, and for anybody that's been aware, I've been on the job hunt now for a few months, and one of the best ways to tackle that is to do your applying for jobs and then take a break. So I've been diving into a lot of really weird like older games. I lucked out over Christmas. I got a fantastic gift from Mr. and Mrs. Claus. A Let's call it a Game Boy with some perks. Like that's about where I'll leave it. Anybody that's in the scene kind of probably has an idea of which one I got. But I've got about 2,000 games on a little system that is in my hand. And I've been diving back into some stuff. It has a lot of the old Disney interactive shit. So like I've got like a Goof Troop, which is a classic on this show, and I've been playing that. But I've also been like diving into some weirder games here or there. I like the original Boy and His Blob on the NES and things like that. Like just weird stuff that I've just been like always a fan of but never tried. And it's been pretty wild. That's what I've been spending a lot of my time going in and out of. But then I found myself kind of from that realizing that there's a lot of stuff like around my house, like classic game wise. I say classic, but I mean like even stuff on my Switch and my PS4 that like I guess the PS4 is kind of classic now, but that I haven't really dug into it since I, maybe played it once and then put it down or played through it once and haven't gone back to it because I haven't really felt that draw to go back. But I have just been diving into all sorts of stuff, like across the canon. Like I replayed a whole bunch of Spyro this past weekend. I've did another run through SteamWorld, Dig and Heist. Just before SteamWorld, what's the new one that came out? There's like the like World Builder one that they just put out. That I do want to dive into. But I wanted to kind of get myself brought up to on the lore because for anybody that's ever played those games, the interconnect and lore between all of them is awesome. And yeah, there's just been a whole bunch of other like larger game franchises that I kind of let go to the wayside. I went back to Mass Effect and did some Andromeda, which has been really wild because like that's supposed to be the kind of controversial one. Not controversial because of any of the subject matter, but just because of quality. And I gotta say that I think it's actually one of the better Mass Effect games. Like shit like that's been going on. Um, with that being said, like I don't know if there's anything, Dev, that you have not gotten an opportunity to really like dive into, but just to kind of bring everybody up to speed about what we're doing, because I think it also kind of impacts how we feel about some other stuff that we do talk about.
Yeah, so first of all, I didn't know if I was supposed to stop you at any point there, so if I made you talk longer than you intended to, apologies. Second is SteamWorld Build. That's the one that
Thank
came
you.
out in December.
Thank you.
Third, the ill-advised thing that I did was chug a 12-ounce cream soda. So there's like a time limit on this one before my bladder explodes. That
I
should
thought you
be
were gonna
fun.
before you start burping the alphabet too.
No, so that whole thing, I really want to touch on a lot of the things that you brought up with that, especially the little Game Boy with perks that you have. I'm willing to full on rip the Band-Aid off and actually discuss emulation because there have been people who listen to this show, hey Hab Guy, who have been asking me about my experiences with those, and they kind of stopped in 2014 when I bought a Mega Man themed one and the screen was terrible. But this very weekend, something I was going to bring to this episode anyway, I built a Game Boy Color, like from the bottom up. I did not construct the motherboard. It was a repro motherboard that I used, but everything else I did was what children in, the places where they build Game Boys were doing in 1998. So it was kind of a really cool project. And
Also,
now,
the situations were a wee bit different between you and
Yeah.
those children. Let's just
I
say
was
there's
doing
certain
it for fun.
privileges
Yes,
that you
that was
probably
slave
had,
labor.
like the ability to walk away at any point.
Yes, no, slave labor, which is still employed. And I mean, that's the big thing that I've done. First of all, this is the first time that we're recording in two weeks. We did the How I Met Your Father retrospective that wasn't much of a retrospective because it felt kind of bad and sad to kick the dead horse 6 months after we had found it.
Yeah, we had longer, bigger plans, and we realized at some point that we didn't want to be that mean to a show. We always try and be as positive as we can, and I think we said some positive things in that episode about like things that we enjoyed about that series while it was around. But we didn't have much more to say that wasn't going to just be shitting on it.
That wouldn't look like we were doing an attack on something that was already dead, right?
Yeah,
there was nothing there,
yeah.
and really that would be because we were looking at it and seeing why did it fail. And the reasons why it failed go back to why we don't like How I Met Your Mother, and it's all stuff that we said
and
before.
I will say this as a final kind of pin on all of that for me. I look forward to anything anyone involved with that show does in the future. It's not that that show soured me in any way to anyone involved, writers, directors, actors. Everybody involved in that show was fun to watch them do what they do. I just think the concept alone made that show pretty much a dead horse.
Yeah, right. And then just to reiterate my final thoughts on it, I'm kind of happy that I get to write my own ending, that they didn't give us a finite ending, especially as, due to the nature of targeted advertising and AI and the modern world we live in, I have been getting nothing but How I Met Your Mother related articles in my feeds. And honestly, going through those and reading them, just seeing how much that show fell off in the later years, being reminded of that, a lot of that's just been glazed out because it had a bad ending, and I'm like, I don't need to revisit this ever again. So the fact that How I Met Your Father didn't end definitively, but ended ambiguously, and every morning I can wake up, and the way I get out of bed is by writing a new ending to How I Met Your Father.
Yeah.
That's not a bad way to live. So cheers, How I Met Your Father. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Will was here. It was a good one. And then Sejohn, as he's wont to do in January because of his zip code, he went to Park City. So you get to hear us talk about Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 in an episode that, man, you know, the cool thing about the time capsule episodes, right, to just more narrow casting here, is the fact that I get to see how much I've grown and changed since we recorded it. And even from October...
For the record, narrowcasting to the audience of our show for listening to an audience of our show is, I think, probably the allowable line. I think that's on the side of allowable, but definitely the line.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate that. This is why I need a Sejohn in my life. Everybody needs a Sejohn in their life. But it is one of those situations where, like, to just see how much I have changed as a person since October of 2023 to January 2024, crazy. Just like it was insane that I could see such noticeable differences in the person that I am. And I forgot that that's an aspect of the time capsule episodes. It's not just recording on a topic that is evergreen. It is also creating a living representation of you and I in that moment. I mean, every episode is like that, but if I listen to this episode tomorrow, right, it will not feel the same as if I listen to this episode 3 months from now. So, but
I mean, think about like literally our last episode recorded before the pandemic and the ways in which like it captured a whole bunch of stuff that we then legitimately were like, I mean, not the pandemic, the writing pandemic, the writer's strike.
Yeah.
Where we just were like, we don't know if we can even put this out. Like the people and the situation in the world that we were when that episode was recorded, not a week earlier,
dude,
is suddenly completely flipped on its head to the point where we don't even know if this is like an acceptable thing to be in the world.
Yeah. I mean, are you talking about the very special episode on Geely? Where
it kind of both Geely and Batman, right? Wasn't Batman the one that
Batman was the time capsule
Batman
one.
was really more what I was talking about, but Geely's also a good example of
Geely,
that,
we recorded the day that
we
we were in the studio recording, and then we got out of it to a message from your brother saying, new podcast guidelines from SAG-AFTRA. You guys might want to check this out and see if you want to comply or if you do comply. And like that was, we finished recording this episode. I love that GLE episode. Now that we can talk about it, and like, regardless of your thoughts about the movie, that is a fun episode of this Say Report. We go down some insane paths because of that
Also,
movie.
it's the year of Ben Affleck. I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to leave that out of the listening for 2020. It is pretty much essential listening for 2023 if
Yeah.
because of the whole Ben Affleck kind of arc that we end up having for the year.
Yeah, we start with Glory Days into Dazed and Confused. That's like the crown jewel of the quinopoly. Quintology? I'm not sure the word there. But yeah, like, and that was, so it's like, oh my God, do we release it? And we ended up releasing it because technically it was recorded before they said, don't do this stuff. So we were able to do it. But yeah, like even that discussion after we had finished discussing that episode, the movie for 2 hours, and then like, so now what do we do with this? Like, is this radioactive? Do we do? Yeah, you're right. It's just been an interesting thing. So I've been reflective because of that, because of the fact that I had 2 Sundays to myself, and I don't mind that we record on Sunday. I look forward to waking up. Every other week I clean the bathroom, I eat something, and then I'm here recording. And then the other ones I sleep in until it's time to record. It works, right? Let's move the curtain on the Devon side of this thing. But having 2 Sundays in a row where I did not have to record, that was kind of nice. I went and got breakfast in Connecticut, which is something I always have to like turn down because I'm not going to be back for this. So it was cool. It was like a type of freedom that I enjoyed. I did last weekend, though, was a completely lost weekend. I partied like I was in college again. I couldn't tell you anything about it other than I beat the Tekken 8 arcade mode, which Tekken 8 saw what Street Fighter 6 did and said, hold my beer, because there's an arcade mode and a story mode. And nice. I've done the arcade mode. I haven't done the story mode yet, which might say something about Tekken. What I can say about Tekken 8 is that I have had my ass handed to me online every single time. And it made me realize just how much that game has changed since Tekken 7 came out. Which I think was...
the important thing to say, and this is probably going to... I'm trying to think of the cleanest way to say this, but take everything that you know and love about Street Fighter that has like a worldview on it in terms of the get good attitude of some of its players, and then Tekken, I feel like, takes that to a certain extreme, and I think that has a lot to do with the markets it's existed in the past. It has a lot to do with the ways in which that game kind of has a niche audience, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at. Basically, when you're talking to fighting game people, right, I feel like Mortal Kombat seems to probably be the most open field where you're going to find probably, you will always find your get goods in every fighting game audience. And I feel like Mortal Kombat has that wider audience where you have your get goods for sure, but there's more people that are casuals. Right, and then Street Fighter kind of is in that same side of the scale. I feel like Tekken, Virtua Fighter, like there's a certain type of game that is the other side of that scale.
So you know that meme where it's the guy in the corner, and he's like, "They don't know I'm this." For Virtua Fighter, that guy is the guy in the corner, and he's like, "They don't know I play Virtua Fighter," and everyone else is like, "That guy plays Virtua Fighter. Stay the fuck away from him."
You know what I think is actually legitimately like straight down the middle of those two types is Smash. I feel like there is just as many people that casually play that game as are like get goods about that game, and I feel like that because of the fact that it's right down the middle, it's really easy to pick on if you're in either camp, right?
Yeah, I get that. I mean, the people, like, I thought I was okay at Smash, and then I signed up for a tournament. I went to a tournament for other things, and part of my ticket registration was being in a Smash Brothers tournament. And I'm like, well, I'm going to get all the value out of my ticket. And then I felt real bad afterwards.
Nothing defines you more as a human, though, man.
Yeah,
when you think that when you're like, I think I can do this. Let me go watch a couple of experts really quick. And in that moment, you either decide, am I going to take this challenge, or am I going to just kind of just politely put my hands up and walk away?
Yep. I mean, I played through to the end. I will say that I did not forfeit. I didn't DNF, but it was one of those situations where I'm like, oh, I play Smash Brothers less than casually. Like, that is the only way I could define how I play that game after seeing how people play that in a tournament setting.
Nah, man, you
Yeah.
can't let that define how you play it on your own, though. Don't do that.
No, I don't know. I mean, I will say this. I really haven't cared about Smash since Melee. Brawl, when it came out, I know that we all got together and played through the storyline at my house. Maybe not all of us. I don't know if you were there. It was mostly the Hollywood video people.
Brawl was the first one. Brawl was the first one that really introduced like an overarching story, right? Where like you had to
Yeah.
play as characters through like some of like the bonus games and stuff like that, and
It had the
like there's
Subspace Emissary, which was
yeah,
the story
yes.
mode. Yeah.
Man, yeah, and they've never. I mean, I adore like the latest Smash, the spirit card system and the ways in which they use that to introduce new stuff and new characters and things like that to it has actually been I find really fun. Like I know that it feels very like Pokemon the card game, the video game, but like I actually very much enjoy that. But even I can admit I don't think that they will ever top anything as good as Subspace Emissary. Like that concept was so mind blowing when it happened, and they'll never be able to recapture that part of it. And because of that, I don't think they'll ever be able to top it.
Yeah, I mean, I never played the fourth game, the one that was on Wii U and the 3DS. I've never played it. I can just admit that. And then the Smash Brothers Ultimate that came out on Switch, I've
Yeah.
never touched the story mode. And I know that it's like a Kirby story mode, like that's what people tell me, and I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. I still have never touched it, and I'm not upset about it. It's
The
just
biggest thing about the story mode in Ultimate is you gotta know going in. It's not that game is four different games in like wrapped up in one. And I don't mean like you can choose to go from one to the other. I mean you get to the end of it and you're like, oh man, this was really good. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, there's a whole other half of a game here. And then you get through that and you're like, oh, actually that was 2/3 and this is the last third of the game. And then you get through that and you're like, oh fuck, there's still another game. The game just that is the game that never ends, and I don't mean that in a good way.
I feel like I'm finding that with a lot of Nintendo games lately, though. Kirby: The Forbidden Kingdom, or Forbidden Lands, I really enjoyed that game, but it kept it being like, now do this, and I'm like, am I done though? I feel like I've done everything I need to do to say I've beaten this game, and this is just all for replayability. Heck, even Return to Dreamland, the remake of the Wii game that came out early last year around this same
Right.
time.
Yeah,
Like
with all the
once I
costumes and stuff, right?
yeah, once I beat it, is like, now beat it again. And I'm like, no, but I don't really want to do that. And they're like, well, then you've only completed 23% of the game. And I'm like, see, that's where I'm calling bullshit the Kirby game. Because
Yeah.
if I beat the game and I beat every level and I got every collectible, and then you're like, you only beat 23% of the game, there's a lot more game. And honestly, I don't know if I'm here for it. I want to be here for it, but that's a lot of game that you're hiding behind.
Yeah, yeah. I will say that I think it's because Nintendo has never truly been able to grasp the concept of New Game Plus, right? Like rather than tying rather than tying like the percentage and the replayability to the idea of just playing through again, just playing the same game, but with different, stuff, right? Whether that's power-ups or access to menus or whatever it is. Rather than do that, what they do is they try to narratively create reasons why you would continue existing in the world. And I've never been able to get on board with that. And that's something that's been true in like all the way back to like early Pokemon games and stuff, right? Where you get through, you get all the badges, and then it's like, now go after the Elite Four. And it's like, okay. And then in some of them you go after the Elite and there's other things after that. And it's just like, I don't really, complete your Pokedex. Okay. I've never been that guy, right? We've talked about that before with Pokemon. But it is a nice like in-world reason, narrative reason to continue going back even after you quote unquote finish the game. And that might be the closest they've ever truly gotten to a good kind of New Game Plus feel. And even that doesn't work for everybody. Like I said, it doesn't work for me.
And
so
it's
like,
also Game Freak.
I don't think they've, I just don't think they've ever been able to really wrap their, yeah. I don't think they've ever been really been able to like wrap their heads around that whole concept, right? Of like how do we cleanly put in this new game plus concept? You know, some of the early games that did this stuff really lucked out by being the first ones that literally all they had to do was just put a new option on the menu. You know, I'm looking at you, Arkham, right? The entire Arkham series of like you just go in and now all of your shit's unlocked. Even though in the narrative of the game you don't necessarily you find those tools as you go and stuff like that, which I think is the other side of the coin that I find really kind of like funny and lazy, but also by that point you want to be OP anyway, so I don't really mind. But it's easy to see why Nintendo looks at that and goes, well, we don't want to do that. We want it to be more organic, right? And then because of that, you end up with stuff like Kirby, where you're just like, I feel like I finished the game. Like I get why they're saying this at this point, but like I feel like I did everything I needed to do.
I hate that final bosses for Kirby are hidden behind boss rushes. That
Mm.
like to fight the final form of the boss, you have to go through a boss rush. That seems stupid to me. Because any other game, I just kind of maybe I have to go through the level again to fight the boss, but like I don't have to go through every single boss to fight
Yeah,
the true boss of this game.
yeah.
Uh, and then I don't really have, excuse me, a narrative connection to that boss because all I did was fight through all the bosses. It's not like I met this guy or I saw this guy or I thought I beat the guy. Like they did a good job in Forgotten Lands where like the king, the Lion King, not he's a king who is a lion. It is not the Disney movie. It turns out he was being affected by an otherworldly entity, and then you go
Mhm.
fight that entity, and that worked for me. Like that was cool. That was classic Kirby too, like Kirby's Adventure, where King DDD, you think that he's trying to be bad, but really he's trying to stop the Nightmare King from coming back to Dreamland. Like that's like cool storytelling. But yeah, and then the final boss being like, oh man, if you want to fight the final coolest boss that we invented, you have to go through the boss rush. And it's like, but shouldn't the final coolest boss be connected to the game I'm playing? Should
Well,
like,
so I'll call out a game that I feel kind of mixed on them because I think they do a really good job of what you're talking about, connecting that kind of like I need to go back to a boss, but at the same time this feels narratively important, but also at the same time I feel like is a real curveball that if you're not ready for it can be a turnoff. Is Super Mario RPG or Super Mario? Yeah, no, that's just what they're calling it now, right? Super
yeah,
Mario RPG. Like I think Super Mario RPG definitely has that moment where you defeat Smithy and there's this whole thing about then having to go to the Smith world, whatever they call it, right? Where like you need to then go to the factory, and in that there's moments where you fight bosses, you fight the Smith versions of bosses and things like that. You can skip some of them you can't.
yeah.
But there's just this whole last kind of fifth to that game that if you're not ready for it, like when I was a kid, I I'm pretty sure that the first time I played through Super Mario RPG, I beat Smithy and turned the game off. I like didn't even stick around. Like like when I was a kid, I did not have the patience for credits or like the wherewithal to like see things through final cutscenes and stuff. Like I beat Smithy, I was proud of myself. I turned off the system and walked away. It wasn't until my like next playthrough or maybe even third or fourth playthrough where like I just happened to realize there was more game after that, and there's like a whole other, like I said, like fifth of a game after that.
Yeah.
And narratively, it works, and it's cool that you do get to see kind of some bosses again, and because you're OP, you kick their asses really quick and stuff like that. Like that's all really fun and all, but like I definitely would understand someone being A, completely thrown by that, and B, not liking it, right? So like, and that's a game that I like adore, right? Like in basically all versions of that game, like I really can't say too many bad things about them. But the idea that there is a pretty much a big old false ending at the end of that is like one of the biggest knocks I have against that game.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the commercials to blame. It's something in the marketing to blame. And you know that if the Say Report is waging war on anything, it's
In
waging
Mario
a war on
RPG or in
marketing.
general, because in
In
Mario
Mario RPG,
RPG, I think the narrative is to blame. You spend that entire game thinking you're going for Smithy. Everybody talks
okay,
about Smithy, all of this stuff, and then you go and you fight this giant sword that has been the face of the bad guy the entire time. And then like you finish it, and they're like, but there's actually a whole world he comes from, which is cool. But there's just this idea of just like, okay, nothing in this game has implied that this other world would be one that I would need to go to, right? Like maybe it's been mentioned that it exists, but like there's been nothing implied that I would need to go there and do something about this.
Right. Where I blame the marketing is that they referred to the sword as Smithy. In the commercials, they really made it feel like the sword was Smithy. And the sword is not Smithy. The sword is Exor, which is like a shortening term of Excalibur. And that whole issue, like I remember when I went together, I'm like, oh, the sword's not Smithy? But like everything told me the sword was Smithy. I like really felt like the sword was the big bad. So then when
we've already talked about how we've already talked about how I think some of the dialogue and I guess I should clarify the American dialogue. Like I think that it's fair to say that there might be differences in the original Japanese and stuff like that. But in the American dialogue, even within the game, there's some issues I have because of the ways in which it doesn't necessarily always clarify what it's saying, and I think that's an important thing to make a distinction about. It's not that I don't think the game doesn't tell you what you need to know. I don't think the game is always very clear on what it's saying. Like look at everything that happened to me with the post game shit, and like going to Frog Fuchsius, or I'm sorry, the Frog Sage, right?
Right.
Like the ways in which like I didn't quite grok like the ways and he was trying to push me to do things / the game was pushing me to keep going back to him for more information. Like I didn't ever get that, and it's not that the game didn't say it didn't clarify it in a way that made me kind of like latch onto it, whereas like you did latch onto that information and you were able to figure that shit out. So like that game has some that game is right on the line of being a little too up its own butt sometimes with like what it expects the player to figure out versus what it wants to directly tell the player to do, which I think is interesting because we're talking about a game that was made at the time when Nintendo would otherwise pretty much be levied for being too explanatory, right? I'm starting to think of like the owl and Link's Awakening and stuff like that, right? Like when Nintendo proper is constantly catching a bunch of shit for being a little too handholdy, this Square Enix Nintendo game I think isn't handholdy enough in some places, right? But it leads to this whole thing where like there's a lot of expectations about what you're doing in that game and what the ending of that game is that then feeds this whole larger thing of, oh shit, there's more game here. And like a lot of this stuff is very problematic and can really turn some audiences off. And like in Mario RPG's case, they really luck out because of a lot of other elements that really make up the distance and really make that game still lovable and playable and all of that shit. Not every game gets that, right? Like there are a lot of games that have these same problems that don't get that benefit of also being kind of badass.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it is the commercial where it's like, Smithy has crashed into Bowser's castle. And then, you know, the visual, it's like, oh, so the sword is Smithy. And then finding out it wasn't, there's that. But then to also, since we have Super Mario RPG on the operating table right now, the methodology for how they make you go to those post-game bosses in the 2023 version of like, oh, did you dream that you beat Smithy? Here's a ticket to go to the Marimore Suite so you can rest up before you fight him for real. Like, I hated that. Dale hated that. She's like, no, I beat Smithy. This little toad's not going to tell me I was dreaming so I can do post-game. Like, that was a weird choice from the game.
I don't even remember it being, like, it's not that I don't believe it was put that way. That's not even, like, how I remember them even talking about it.
Yeah.
Again, I went to Fuchsius and he was like, go do this thing you should have done while you were playing the real game before we talk about any post-game shit. And I was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah. No, it is, yeah, because you wake up, you when you start your save game, you're back in Mario's pad, and Toad busts in, and he goes, oh, were you dreaming about beating Smithy? And it's like, fuck you. Now, what is that? Who is that for? That's not for me. I don't enjoy that. I beat Smithy. Don't be a little toad about it. Freaking Toad. Huh. All right, yeah, so going back, playing old games, I got the Game Boy Color that I built, and we ended up picking up flash carts, so that's how we're going to be playing the games. I'm curious about the device that you're using. If we can have this discussion as legally gray as possible.
Yeah, I don't want to advertise it because I don't want to like send people out to go looking for it, but I think anybody that does 2 seconds of research into these concepts is going to find this particular device. Let me like I'm on a pretty well-known one. The reason that I even received one was that it is a handheld that is shaped like a Game Boy, but it's got a phenomenal display on it, and like I said, the memory on it runs deep. There's actually room to add more games to it if you want, if you kind of know how to get into that sort of thing. It's got a USB-C connection that you can connect up to then basically anything that has USB on the other side. Like that's the so there's a lot of like really cool stuff in that regard for it. There's all sorts of like really cool like set dressing on it. Like you can change up, backgrounds, colors, but also you can set up like the display. Like you can turn it into a dot matrix display. You can set up a scan display. You can just do straight up HD. Like there's all sorts of cool stuff on it in that regard, which actually I have found has been super helpful because as I play some games, like some old Game Boy games, having it HD is actually kind of like detrimental because like the way that it smooths out lines and stuff, you actually
Hmm.
have a hard time with like pixel placement, which is important in some of those older Game Boy games.
Yeah, they were built for the displays that were going to be used to play them.
Yeah, that's the best way of putting it, right? Yeah, for sure.
They knew the
Um,
limitations and they took advantage of those limitations. Are you willing to share the company that makes the device?
oh God, I don't even know if I could say it. It's like Korean or like Malaysian or something. Like it's a yeah. Give me.
Yeah, that's completely
I would
fine.
need to like pull the paperwork out to get
Like,
the
yeah,
name on it.
because that's what I'm doing. Because there are so many companies that do this type of stuff.
Yeah.
The one that really kind of blew up the internet is Analog. They do things like the Mini NT, the Super NT, the Mega NT, or the Mega SG, and all those are basically console on a chip FPGA solutions to play regular Nintendo, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and the Sega Genesis Entertainment System. They just recently did a TurboGrafx called the Duo. And TurboGrafx is one of those systems that, like, if you know, you know, but I don't feel like a lot of people are in the know on that one, even
Mm.
after TurboGrafx was one of the featured consoles on the Wii. But the one that really kind of blew up the internet, and it's because we were all at home during the pandemic. We all had extra money in our pockets because of the stimulus checks. So when they announced the Analog Pocket, which was designed and shaped to look like our classic Game Boy, so pre Game Boy Advance, anything that came pre Game Boy Advance, vertical, basically, portrait orientation. Uh, and not only could it play all the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance, but it could also, with adapters, play TurboGrafx 16 games, Game Gear games, Neo Geo Pocket games, and like it was just this huge system. And then to go one step beyond, once they finally wound up in people's hands after difficulties with pre-orders and sourcing parts and all of the other things that plagued electronics during the pandemic,
Right.
it was found that they were extremely easy to hack and then use as a way to play any of those chips on a system that I mentioned before.
Yeah, so
So,
so Analog Pocket is definitely the family, shall I say, but the one that I've got has all the way up to PS1 games. Like
yeah,
I've got PS1 going backwards essentially. Like and I mean like I'm talking about like PC Engine games, a bunch of like
yeah, which is
Capcom Arcade, and I mean the Capcom Arcade when one of the things to know about the history of Capcom Arcade is just in Japan that shit was fucking huge. There were so many different games and so many different iterations of games. Like when we talk about Capcom Arcade on the American side of things, there's some very we got a very curated list of
mm-hmm,
arcade games, right?
yes.
When in what was coming over in that regard. In Japan, they got everything, and sometimes they were geared towards like being money munchers like we know of over here, so like the games are super hard. Sometimes they were just like, no, we want this game to be out there so that people are aware of it. It's marketing for them to then buy the console version, so those games are actually rather easy because we want people to be able to play through. So there's like a wide variety and a wide range of games that like completely unexpectedly you didn't know there was an arcade version. Or what's happening for me is I didn't realize how many games I played that actually were like SNES remakes of old like arcade or NES games, right? Or
Yeah.
like that idea that I mean, I think I've talked about this before. One of my greatest memories growing up is the pharmacy near us, like not the video rental place, but the pharmacy near us had a rental store in it, which was buck wild. Now that I think about it, like as an adult, but like as a kid, like that was just one of the places we went to go rent video games and movies sometimes. Um, and one of the games that they had that we rented all the time was Alfred Chicken for the Super Nintendo. I had no idea that that was actually a like an upscaled game from the old like NES arcade era. Like there's a whole like original Nintendo slash arcade version of Alfred Chicken that I was just like, wait a minute, there's no way this is real. No, it's real. That's actually what Alfred Chicken was before I played it. Alfred Chicken was such a big franchise that there was a NES original version, an arcade version, and then eventually they made a remake of it for the Super Nintendo, which is buck wild to me because who the fuck has heard of Alfred Chicken?
I mean, it was in all of the comics that I read as a kid. But to
Yeah.
go even further, I mean, Alfred Chicken pre the Super Nintendo release was an exclusive to Europe game because
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
originally started on the Amiga and then went to the Amiga CD32 before getting an NES version. And all of that was in 1993. And then, like, suddenly it's popular and everybody's loving it. So in February 1994, 30 years ago, from when we're recording this episode, at least in the month, they're like, we're going to release this on all the systems. So as much as it's like, it's a up-res of an NES game, it's also kind of a port of an Amiga game to the NES that was also ported to Game Boy, that was also ported to Super Nintendo, and released across the board at that time.
And that's
That-
what makes these things so fucking cool.
Yeah.
Like I as much as I don't want to like sit here and like push people to get these things because of the legality of it, every other part of me wants to be like, this should be everybody should get a hold of this. Any kid that's into video games should get a hold of one of these things because the ways in which it, first of all, shows you just what games used to be like, but then on top of that, the ways in which it has opened all of these doors to the history of how like these games actually worked. Because we have to come to terms with the fact that, especially here in America, and especially like at a certain like price point, like there was a privileged bubble that we lived in with video games that really truly allowed us to form some pretty warped opinions about like the history of video games and how video games work and how video games should be made and blah blah blah. The ways in which we really lean into, well, this is what video games have always done, without kind of acknowledging the fact that that's how what they've always done here in America, and if you could afford the top of the line shit, right? Because if you were some poor kid in Europe who was just kind of getting a hold of just kind of some runoff stuff that existed, right? There was some wild shit that you played. And as a kid, this happens all the time. There's that one game in the house that you just think of as the Super Nintendo game or the Nintendo game or the Sega game or the whatever. And then you grow up and realize nobody else fucking owned it, right? Like that was me when I first started talking about Alfred Chicken in like college. And like, I realized nobody else had ever played that game, and that's when I came to terms with the fact that I was like, because the rental store near me had it, we played it so much, but nobody else had that experience. So like, I was the odd man out who thought this was just one of the classics.
Yeah. And I mean, the way that it was marketed, I could also understand why you would think that. If you were reading comics, you were probably seeing Alfred Chicken stuff. Disney Adventure Magazine.
I was going to say Disney Adventure was really kind of the
Alfred
place
Chicken
I think
all
of.
the
Yeah.
time. Like every other page was an Alfred Chicken advertisement. And like, so I brought up Analog Pocket, and that's like sort of the big name. It's expensive, but it's very friendly. It has a big community. But then just because if we're going to talk about things that are technically illegal or the legality is blurred, I'm going to give everybody equal time. So then like Miu is a company that does these systems, Retroid, Ambernick, and Ein. And then there's also Funkey, which is one of those things where I don't even know what Funkey is. This is the first time that I've seen it, but it looks like a Game Boy Advance SP, and it folds, and it is super small, like half of an iPod Shuffle small. So I don't even know how you would play it. But
Yeah.
is any of those the companies that you are in bed with to emulate Sejohn? You can just say yes or no.
No, like I said, it's an analog pocket. I've actually
Oh,
got a
okay.
nice clear purple case on mine, and that kind of thing.
Oh, awesome.
Um,
Congratulations. Welcome to the little analog pocket company. We could trade. I have the link cable. We could link it up
Nice.
to Sejohn.
Excellent. We could trade Pokemon.
We could trade Pokemon.
Or we could play Four Swords Adventure.
Well, actually, for Four Swords Adventure, as much as I would love to do that, you need a modified Game Boy to GameCube cable. There are some 3D printing options out there.
GameCube.
Yeah.
Right.
The ways to do it. I mean, we could do Four Swords Adventure from Link to the Past remake. We could do that one, no problem. But if I want to play the one on GameCube. And the way I want to play that one on GameCube is I want to get one GameCube that is playing it, and then I want to get 4 GameCubes with Game Boy players and have everybody on their own TV. This is a dream of mine that I know will probably never come to fruition, but I would love it if I could make it happen.
Yeah, but I am using it to kind of fill in some gaps that I know about and discover some new gaps I didn't and fill those in as well. But like, I grew up in a house that had Illusion of Gaia in the house, and I adore that game, have always loved that game, and then only found out probably about 5 or 6 years ago that it's actually the third in a series.
It is the second in a trilogy, my friend.
Second, it's the second in the trilogy.
Yep.
Yeah. And so Soul Blazer being the first one in that trilogy. Yep. And so like I had never played Soul Blazer before, so like I'm playing through that, which is a wild little experience of like building your town and going through and saving, and defeating monsters in order to save townspeople, which give you like these quests to go back into the dungeons and stuff like that. It's a wild little fun RPG experience that is both nothing like Illusion of Gaia, except that in all of the ways it is exactly like Illusion of Gaia.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the story stuff and some of the visual stuff, I'm just like, oh yeah, this is definitely that. But like game loop wise, totally different game.
And then there's Terranigma, which is on my list of the 12 games I want to beat this year, because I started Terranigma in 2002. This was after I had beaten all of the Mystical Ninja games in Japanese that were released for the Super Nintendo. So Ganbare Goemon 2, 3, and I think it's like All Stars, or the fourth game is not Ganbare Goemon 4. I will say that. Also, I talked about Mamoru no Bankaru. I am 16 levels into it. I'm loving it. I just haven't had time to play it because Tekken came out and with my teeth and like being able to do it. But I do hope to finish Mamoru no Bankaru this month so I can give you a full read on that. But after beating the Ganbare Goemon games, I'm like, I feel like I can play through pretty much any game that's like not in English. Like I can probably mash my head against the wall until I get through it. But then I found out about Terranigma, which was a European release, so I could at least read it. It was in English. It was an English option. But then I got a call from a girl when I was playing it, and I never went back to Terranigma. And that's a true story.
It's very sad. Terranigma is the weird one too, where like it's one of those like kind of early examples of a game using quote unquote the bad ending from like the game before as like the canon ending. Like the ways in which Terranigma is not related to the Gaia stuff in like so it is an unofficial trilogy, right? Like these three games are connected in concepts, but like they don't outwardly talk about characters from the ones before. They don't outwardly talk about like specific events from the games before, but the worlds that exist and the ways in which they refer to objects in the world and things like that, they definitely all kind of exist within each other, right? So Terranigma has this weird like element to it where the whole point of the story is like there's this like the earth-shattering, well, not earth-shattering, but earth-hollowing event, I guess is what I should say. But like the earth is pretty much like on its last legs because of events that happened in the past, and it's up to your main character in that one to kind of like restore what was broken. And you kind of, as you go through that story, get the impression that what had gotten fucked up is what you did in Illusion of Gaia, which in turn takes place with a bunch of like areas and characters and pieces that you kind of ran into in Soul Blazer. Like the ways in which there's like this overarching story if you're paying attention, and some of what you did in past games actually fucked up the world to the point where you have to fix them in future games. It's such a wild like concept to be explored in like the early 90s when people were not necessarily like online like breaking this shit down. There was no MatPat, right? There was no game theory sitting around like breaking down like the secret connection between these games or anything like that. People just kind of had to figure that shit out on their own, and they did, right?
Yeah.
Like this isn't like something people only discovered in the internet era. Like people knew back then if they were paying attention. It's just like how deep into these games did you have to be to pick this shit up? It's wild.
So there was all the talk of there probably being a Nintendo Direct coming soon. And one person said, finally give us the trilogy that we desire, which they were referring to Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, and Terranigma, which Illusion of Gaia are also Illusion of Time outside of America, which is
true,
crazy if you think about it, because the time is not the illusion in that game. The Earth and the stability of the Earth is the illusion that's going on.
There is something to Will, your character in that, and the two other forms he can take, that being a time kind of based, like when I think they call it the illusion of time, I think they're referring specifically to Will and his timeline, not necessarily the world's timeline, right?
Yeah, that's fair, because Shadow and Phoenix are completely different sort of things, but still, yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge it in case we had any international listeners, specifically like Will, because he's like, he didn't know what Illusion of Gaia was once in a conversation. I'm like, all right, you knew it as Illusion of Time, probably.
Yeah.
And that was one of those just interesting moments that I've had discussing the series. And someone like snapped back to that, like, give us the trilogy that we really want, with like, they're not a trilogy, they're just made by the same company. And that'd be like, well, yeah, but they're still a trilogy. I don't know how far you've gotten into Soul Blazer. It makes me so happy to hear that you're playing Soul Blazer, because that is my favorite of that series. And that comes purely from reading code books as a kid, and there being like an extensive list of how to find the rare items in that game. And then I'm like, well, I want to find this game. This game sounds awesome.
Yeah,
it is.
So I've gotten probably about 2 hours into playing, and I feel like I'm pounding through it. I don't know if I'm supposed to be going slower or spending more time in town or what, but I basically just keep running back into the dungeon to free more people. Like, yeah, people will like then give you like a quest to do something specific, but they never seem to be out of your main path. You never seem to have to go too far out of your way on the main path in order to complete those quests, you know what I mean? So I find that it's best to go in, get as far as you can until you literally hit a point where you can't go forward until you go back to town and talk to somebody, then go back to town, talk to everybody, and then just dive right back into the quote unquote dungeon, right?
Right.
So wait, so I don't know. I couldn't tell you how far along I am.
Okay.
I feel like I'm pretty far along because that game seems to move at quite a click. But that game could be 30 hours long, and I may not realize it. You know.
My favorite thing is that the description that you just gave, I have no idea how far you are into the game, and I love that.
So like
I've
gotten the house with like the guy running around claiming that he saw a ghost in the painting. I've gone and talked to the young lady that in her dream, so that I have to like go and find like the paintbrush in order to talk or get into the painting or something. I haven't quite gotten into the painting yet, I guess is where I would say.
Okay, yeah, cool. So yeah, you got a lot of game left. That's more what I was looking for. But there's like certain guardians that you're going to meet in that game, and then like all of those guardians end up being in like represented or talked about in Illusion of Gaia. Now Terranigma, I can't talk about that, but I do know that it is because of what you do in Gaia that the world is the way that it is in Terranigma.
Right.
I know that part of it, because that's how I got to the second, like, final boss dungeon of Terranigma before, it was the summer, and you want to come over to hang out in my pool? And like, yeah, I'm a 16-year-old boy. I want to go hang out in a girl's pool. That's what I want to do at 16. Yeah. Sorry, Terranigma. Devon drops his SNES controller, a la Andy dropping Woody in Toy Story, and puts on a bathing suit. And
the idea that you need to call upon the powers of the Phoenix in Soul Blazer, right? Like kind of feeding into some stuff that you do in Gaia. It's a wild thing to ignore that they're a trilogy now, because we've known for 30 years that they are. Like 25 years, I guess, if you want to go off of, I don't know when Terranigma came out, but this idea that like,
I think.
like you, Yeah, but this idea that you like argue about them being a trilogy when they are pretty colloquially considered a slant trilogy, I guess might be the best way to call it. Like I don't know what the proper term is, but we know they're connected. Like what a weird internet argument to like internet hill to die on.
Yeah, and I was really surprised to see it, but like that was one of those things where then everybody came forward and was like, "Well, no, it's not just that they were made by the same company. It'd be like if Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3 were not all called Final Fantasy, and then somebody was like, "Yeah, but they're not the same." And it's like, "No, it's about how the crystals can be used for good or for ill."
Yeah.
And then the destruction of the crystals in general. Like that's a story, even though it's not the same people in the same places, is the same general world that is being affected by these crystals.
What's wild is that like I feel like it's completely different in the film fandoms, right? Where if a director like somebody like Kevin Smith who loves to do like connective tissue between his movies, or Quentin Tarantino who loves to put in like similar objects or props and things like that, right? People will then always talk about them as quote unquote trilogies, even though they may not be narratively connected to one another. But like, oh, they exist in the same world. Clearly, they've got red apple cigarettes in all three of these, so clearly there's a trilogy here to discuss. And it's just like, sure, like I'm not gonna shit in your pie for that stuff. But like, that's kind of a harder argument to make for me when literally all it is just a single prop element that doesn't really affect the narrative in any way happens to be there. To me, that's more of an homage than it is an idea of a connected world. But like, if you want to do some theorizing and talk about the ways in which this really kind of breaks down into like this, what it means that this thing happened in this movie must mean that this is how it would work in that movie, is like, I mean, we literally do that with Adam Sandler, right? And the ways in which we talk about how like magic didn't show up in this movie, but everything else implies that it would be in a world in which magic probably could exist because we know God exists in this other movie. It's like is all we do on the ASCU. So like, I'm never gonna tell anybody to not dig that deep into stuff. But like, I feel like Soul Blazer, Terra Nigma, Illusion of Gaia, like I feel like the three of those have some pretty solid connections to ignore.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like Valverde in Commando, Super Carrier, and Die Hard 2. Like, that's all the same fictional country. So you're like, oh, all these things can be happening at the same time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those three movies are, like, in the same trilogy, right? That's more of an example like that to go along with,
my
like...
favorite example is Munch. Like, Detective Munch showing up in, what is it, like 20 different properties over his time as a character. And, like, try and tell me that X-Files and Law and Order exist in the same universe.
Well, I mean, that's the beauty of X-Files, though, is that all of that crazy paranormal stuff is happening right under our noses, and it's just whether or not we care to notice.
Just thinking about the idea that the idea that everything you watch in Law and Order is colored by the fact that there could be a killer doll out there somewhere is phenomenal to me.
Oh, I mean, what if everything is the theory of St. Elsewhere, that it's all taking place in the imagination and snow globe of a kid because of how St. Elsewhere, like, crossed over with a bunch of different shows, and then those shows crossed over with a bunch of different shows.
Yeah.
Like, it's a fun thing to talk about, but when you're talking about Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, and Terra Nigma, that's a shared trilogy. They're telling a story. Not to spoil Soul Blazer for you or for anybody, but if you get 100% of the items, your character looks a hell of a lot like the Phoenix form that Will takes in Illusion of Gaia.
Yeah.
That's the thing that happens in the game. It's fun. It's a good one. I love that game. I love Soul Blazer. That's one of my like secret bangers. And it was one of those ones where like I brought it up a couple of times, a la your Alfred Chicken, and people were like, "What the frig are you talking about?" But everybody knew Illusion of Gaia. And then when I find the Blazer Illusion of Gaia, I'm like, "Oh, this is just a sequel to Soul Blazer." Man, now I'm even more sad.
Yeah.
But no, that's cool to hear that you have the analog pocket. And that's why I was curious. I mean, it's out there. It's well publicized. And that's what we're doing now. Like, handheld emulation machines are this huge industry because of what you're talking about right now. The Switch made portable gaming, like, I don't know, not accepted, cool, but popular again.
Yeah, no, it made it cool again.
Yeah,
like walking around with a game system in your pocket, like suddenly became like a fun thing to do again, you know?
Yeah, and like That's why I wanted to build a Game Boy Color when I found out those kits were out there. And that was a fun experience, and now I'm probably going to carry that around with me. Charges with USB-C, already has a bunch of games on it. Super Mario Brothers Deluxe took away my life in 2000, so like, why not give it back to me? I'm sorry, I'm excited to be talking to you again, Sejohn. It's felt like too long. And in the time since our last episode, well, like our last proper episode, when like Will wasn't here or it wasn't a time capsule, a movie that you recommended I see is now available to rent and watch at home. So I am happy to announce that I have seen The Beekeeper.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if we were going to talk about like Oppenheimer, if we were going to talk about Wish, if we were going to talk about.
Well, no, I haven't seen Wish yet. I saw Oppenheimer before that episode. I mean, I can talk about Oppenheimer. There's a bunch of stuff. The Oscars have been announced, so anything there. You know what? Here's what I'm doing. It's our show, right? I can do whatever the frig I want. I understand that people are upset that Margot Robbie and Greta Gerwig did not get nominations for Barbie. I understand that. But to focus on like only Ryan Gosling getting one, that is reductive, and it erases the fact that America Ferrera also got a nomination for Best Supporting Actress.
I will support that thought. I have some feelings
about anyone from that movie getting nominated, and not at the very least Greta Gerwig, because I feel like everything that has been nominated for that, including America Ferrera and Ryan Gosling and all that, but like there's also like screenplay nominations and stuff too, right? Like, didn't Greta Gerwig get nominated?
She got nominated for
the
the best adapted screenplay, and the movie got a Best Picture nod, which I know that Best Picture is now kind of diluted by the fact that we can have up to 700 nominees in that category. I know I'm being hyperbolic, but still.
But like Ryan Gosling specifically, and this is what really, I mean, that was the big news that really kind of set all this off, right? But his performance is phenomenal, and he's a fantastic actor and should be recognized for the work he put in. It is also so informed by Gerwig as a director. Like, if you watch Ryan Gosling in that movie, you go, man, I've never seen him act like this before. That's because this director is pulling something out of him that you've never seen before. Like, that's where it kind of falls apart for me. But you're totally right. Like, the ways in which people have been talking about Ryan Gosling being the only nomination for that movie, completely ignoring the 3 other nominations that it got, is like wild.
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially for America Ferrera. Like, it's like, that is a female who acted in this movie, who is a pretty big part of the movie, right? Like, spoilers for Barbie, she's the real world avatar of Margot Robbie's Barbie, right? Like, they're connected in a lot of ways.
No, I mean, she's a woman. Yeah, she's a woman that appears in that film and is kind of in a lot of ways the heart of that film, really. Like, as much as Margot Robbie as Barbie is the titular character, it is that old classic trope of, right, where like the audience XP is actually this woman in this movie, and like her speech about like what it feels like to be a woman in the real world versus the Barbie world is like the key to that whole thing, right? Is to that whole point that they're trying to make in it. Yeah.
And so I understand when people, like I said, I've said it already and I'll say it again, being upset that Margot Robbie doesn't get a nomination, being upset that Greta Gerwig doesn't get a nomination for Best Director. Completely understandable, completely founded. But when you don't also check that there was a female who acted in that movie who got a nomination in like the clickbaity way to be like, Ryan Gosling, only one to receive nomination for Barbie, that feels just as toxic. In a way.
Toxic in a different way, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not trauma Olympics, so like I feel weird saying like it's just not, as or more than or something like that. But like, yeah, like there's definitely some toxicity coming from those conversations as well. I also, you know, there's something to be said about the fact that I also just don't think that some of the people that were nominated for stuff deserved it, you know, like that's also part of it, is that like for me at least, is like it's not just that you know Greta Gerwig or Margot Robbie didn't get their accolades for putting a movie in theaters that probably saved a bunch of cinemas this year. Like, you can tell how I feel about this, but also on top of that, I do feel like some of the people that were nominated didn't necessarily put some of the best work in that they've ever done, and I don't know necessarily why they're getting the recognition over things like Margot Robbie, and as an actress, as a producer, again, just like she's clearly going to get her dues in the ways that Barbie is nominated for Best Picture and stuff, but. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know, man.
Yeah, it's just something. The erasure of America Ferrera bothered me. And we can talk. I don't really want to give any more to the Oscars, but that is something that I have been sitting with. That's like Ryan got. I'm like, yeah, but why don't we focus on the person who did get one? Like, I'm not. I'm not saying it's not right that they didn't, but there's a woman who got one that nobody's talking about, and that feels strange to me.
Yeah.
Because I certainly don't think, like you said, her whole speech is the heart and driving force behind the movie. She didn't get one so that, like, well, we got to nominate somebody from Barbie. No. She earned her nomination.
Yeah.
But frick the Oscars. I mean, I've been seeing them. I saw Oppenheimer. I really liked it. There were some things I didn't enjoy about it. I've seen Killers of the Flower Moon. We talked about that brief in our Hellboy episode. And we'll revisit that for Brendan Fraser History Month. And then, otherwise for that, the big one for me, I saw Argyle in theaters. I really enjoyed it, but I can't say anything more about it. If Sejohn's ever able to do it, and then once it is available to rent, I would love to go off on Argyle. I bought the book. I will say that. And I will also say that it seems like a book a la The Princess Bride, that was written because of the movie, not before and to inspire the movie, which is important, with a lot of Matthew Vaughn stuff. Looking at you, Stardust. But yeah, so that was really good. And then I saw The Beekeeper because of your glowing recommendation. And I have to say, that movie was fucking awesome. And you it's not that you gave me a hard sell. It's not that you presented a hard sell on the show. But if you had just mentioned David Ayer as the director, I would have ran out and seen it right away.
Yeah. So I feel like David Ayer comes with a little bit of an asterisk nowadays, right? Because like some of the stuff that dude is putting out, everything that dude is putting out is clearly for himself.
Right.
Like he's very much the kind of movie maker that makes movies that he wants to be making at the time. And he kind of doesn't always understand that not everybody's into what he's into.
Yeah. He's like the American Luc Besson.
Yeah.
But that movie, oh my God, that film was so good. And even at an hour and 45 minutes, it felt like it took forever, but in the good way. Right? Yeah. Like I was so immersed in the world that I look up and I'm like, oh my God, it's only noon because we started it at like 10 o'clock. I'm like, wow. I was so invested. He builds a beautiful world.
There's so much meat on its bones.
Oh
and I think I said this when I talked about it, but like creates a world that like they can, should, and I want to go back to, right?
Oh yeah. And they give themselves a lot of sort of on-ramps to that as well. Mm-hmm. They set up a clandestine organization in The Beekeeper that is far-reaching and could go and be anywhere. And I hope that, the fact that, so my favorite story about The Beekeeper is that for Australia, they're like, nah, nobody's going to want to care about this stupid movie. Let's put it in like 50 theaters and we'll make a little bit of money on it. And then Australians complained because it wasn't playing anywhere near them. And theaters complained because they're like, we're selling out and people can't see this movie because you only put it into 50 theaters. So they expanded it. And now The Beekeeper has grown to such a level where like it was supposed to be released to stream for free this past weekend, not just for rental, but because it's still making so much money internationally, they're like, once it slows down in theaters, that is when we will put it for free streaming.
Yeah. I mean, it's also very much like it feels very much like Jason Statham's like Rambo. It not like in character, but literally the movie Rambo for
Stallone.
For Stallone. And like not First Blood. I mean, like later in the series, Rambo, where
The
like
fourth
he's getting
movie.
older,
Yeah.
and the kills are just gross and violent, and like the storyline is literally just like this poor woman gets fridged in order to give the like there's so much tropey shit that is just thrown onto this story just to let Jason Statham just be a like that's the whole point of the movie is like how can we give Jason Statham another Jason Statham moment, and like you know, you and I complain about this a lot. They just don't make movies like that anymore, right? You know, and sometimes for right reasons, for like good reasons. Like, yeah, we need to get away from certain tropes and storytelling aspects and hiring aspects and movie making aspects that get some people down. But we should still be able to make movies like this and make them where everybody gets their due, right? And I think that The Beekeeper is definitely a step in the right direction. I do think there's still some things to be said about some choices made, both on and off screen, about the ways in which it kind of just feeds the beast. But like, I don't want these kinds of movies to disappear. I want people to start figuring out how to keep making these kinds of movies, but in 2024, right? And I think The Beekeeper is a phenomenal like example of how we can continue to make this type of film now, right?
Yeah, it's and again, once it's been more accessible, honestly, once its meteoric rise and ability to appeal to the masses slows down and anyone can view it on streaming, so I can say without adding a like cost to the listener, stop the episode right now, go watch The Beekeeper and then come back cuz we about to talk about The Beekeeper. We're going to talk about The Beekeeper sometime this year. Maybe it'll be a time capsule episode so that it's there and we get to really like connect to and save our feelings away forever. But I mean, we've said a lot about it right now and we have not even scratched the surface. That is like what I could say about this movie in terms of everything that it does.
Yeah,
we have given you.
And I just Josh Hutcherson, like I just oh my god, as like Logan Muskerberg in this movie is like such a
dude. Everything. Oh, it was so good, and I want to thank you for the recommendation. And it also made me have some thoughts about like something like Argyle. So again, this will be revisited on a later episode of the Say Report, but right now, huge Say Report seal of approval on the Beekeeper. So if you're looking for something to see, it is a worthy usage of your time. And it is available to rent. It's only available to rent. And it's like $20 at home. But then think about it. That's kind of how much you're going to have to pay at a movie theater. So
no, I think that, you know, this is an interesting way to transition into some of the streaming and re-releasing of movies stuff that's been going on too, because like I think we're starting to kind of see as get out of the COVID era, everything's going to just come to streaming immediately. That being said, like windows between release in theater and streaming are still pretty tight. But I'm seeing more movies come out with that, like, you need to pay to rent this first for the first couple of weeks thing before we make it free attitude. More and more and more that's happening. And it, like, I think it should, because I think it's something that we learned last year, something that I was really big on, is that I think Disney's big bad year that they had, and I mean, I can't sit here and deny it as much as I actually enjoyed more than didn't their stuff last year. I can't ignore what happened, you know.
Yeah, you can't ignore the facts of it, man. Like it is
right. But I think a large part of what really bit them in the ass was that they've had for 4 or 5 years now this pipeline in place where things were just easier to wait for at home, you know, and they did that on purpose during COVID, and then they kind of kept going with it, I think, to see if financially it was viable. I think they learned it wasn't last year, right? And so I think you're going to see more and more of them kind of turning back, Disney turning away from that model of day and date availability on streaming, or at the very least like available in 30 days, like that, like whatever you're expecting in terms of I'll just wait to see it at home. I don't think it's going to be as easy as it's been for the last half a decade. I think Disney really realized how much that particular piece of the puzzle was just not fitting, right? And I think they're just going to eliminate it. That being said, I don't think they can ever truly walk away from that now. I think they've really made a deal with the devil in that regard, and they're really going to have to learn to balance between like what's available where and when. Funny enough, this actually goes to something that I saw at Sundance this year. You know, one of the very first big Sundance movies I ever saw and gushed about on the show was Timmy Failure, right at the beginning of the pandemic, and how that really became like a tentpole movie for them starting Disney Plus. because they could say that they had like a Sundance movie that was coming straight to their streaming service and stuff like that. And sure enough, one of the two big family movies, Sundance, for anybody that doesn't know, has a family section every year, and they always try and do one that's more young adult and one that's more child oriented. So it's always two movies. It's been this way for the last 3 or 4 years. And the young adult one this year was yet another Disney purchased, not Disney produced. It's one of those situations where this movie was made separate from them, but then Disney picked it up before it ever even hit Sundance. But it's called Out of My Mind, which is based on a book from probably about 25 years ago at this point, about a young girl with cerebral palsy, and the entire thing is told from like narrative like in her head because she's nonverbal. And like it's really, really, like, you know, it's really touching, it's really heartbreaking, it's really beautiful the ways in which it talks about that life. Cannot talk more, cannot gush enough about that movie. Like, phenomenal work in that movie by everybody involved. And Disney picked it up, and like sitting there and knowing that Disney already had it and stuff like that. And that is probably going to be one that they're probably going to just go right to streaming with, because it's a little artsier, it's a little more niche. I don't know, like, unless they get some real big like money behind it in some regard, marketing wise, there's not really like Jennifer Aniston is involved in it, but not necessarily on screen. So like there's like one person that you can really point to in the whole thing. So without star power behind it, and with it being a more kind of smaller audience film, I don't see them really making a large effort to push it in theaters. You know, if it does come out, it'll be one of those like 3 weekend deals, but the bigger deal for it will probably be Disney Plus, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's the kind of film that is more suited to like sitting around watching with your family and talking about after. Like, I'm totally behind that. That being said, I think Pixar will fucking lose their shit if their next movie doesn't get to come out in theaters.
Yeah, and when it's in their next movie, Inside Out 2, like the whole drive behind that is the first one did well, so we'll go back to the well with that.
Right, so, and Elemental had this really weird back and forth where like everybody thought it was coming to streaming, then they found out it was in theaters, but by that point everybody was like, well, I'll just wait for it to be streaming. I think they've been more than clear that Inside Out 2, like, that's what I mean when I said that like Pixar's going to lose their shit. Like, I think Disney has made it very clear that they are going back to theaters with Inside Out 2 as far as Pixar is concerned.
Right. And I mean, there's two paths that I can go here, and I'm going to go for the first one because we have the numbers on it, and the other one's a little bit more unsure. That's why I think Disney, with these next 3 months leading up to Inside Out's release, is doing the sort of bringbacks. That's what Showcase Cinemas calls them, but it's not even really a bringback. It's a theatrical presentation of Soul, then Turning Red this February, following up with Luca in March. And Soul came out, and wet blood fart would be an adjective to describe it. It did not do very well coming back to theaters.
Well, I'll be honest, I didn't know it was coming back to theaters until I was looking at showtimes for The Beekeeper and saw that it was playing. And I was like, holy shit, they put Soul in theaters. And then you and I talked about it, and you were like, yeah, they're going to do that with these. Like, they have done no work to make sure people know this is happening. And that's where I'm surprised at how much I have seen about Inside Out 2 being a theatrical release. Like, they are really making it a point that you know that one's a theatrical release, when I didn't even know they were re-releasing these other 3 movies literally in the same year.
Yeah. And it's strange because I think that's by design. I think what they're doing is we want to try to bring in money without spending anything extra on marketing or anything like that. They're hoping that parents bring their kids to the theater, and there's nothing out there right now for children, right? I think Trolls Band Together is still the latest, like, kids movie. Oh, I guess Migration came out, right?
Migration's the big one right now. Trolls Band Together, I think, is already available for streaming, isn't it?
It's not on any of the streaming services. You can buy it, but it's not like free to stream anywhere.
Oh, right. It's not. You can buy
or rent.
Well, and I think Trolls Band Together is not available free for streaming, but it is available to watch at home already.
Yeah, it's available to watch at home. But then, I guess Migration. Did anything come out in January though that was like hyper kid oriented? Or was it just Soul? And even then,
I've been in Sundance mode, so
that's an argument where Soul.
But I don't think.
Yeah,
I don't think there is, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're correct.
So I think Migration was the last one that had any sort of real marketing behind it. And if we're wrong, I mean, please let us know. sayreport@gmail.com or to me at Devon D. Decker on Twitter, well, X, formerly Twitter. Like, I'd like to hear if we're missing out on one. Like he said, he's been in Sundance mode. I've been hyper-focused on Madam Web. Like, Argyle was a surprise. Where, like, I got tickets for us to go see a movie, Devon, and I'm like, oh, what, Madam Web? And they're like, no, not Madam Web. That's coming later this month. Like, I have been a dog with a bone about Madam Web. And I finally got my tickets, and I'm so excited to see Madam Web. But yeah, so I think Disney was like, we know that there's no competition coming out. We'll re-release these movies so that when parents are at the theater, they will go take their kids to see this movie because it's the only option that isn't sex and violence.
Mm-hmm.
And that did not really work out with Soul. And I am interested to see what happens with Turning Red.
But
and more with
you say it didn't work out with Soul, but I think one of the important things that's really taken into account here is Soul made its money already as far as they're concerned. They are not with the release of Turning Red and the release of Luca later, they're not going to take these numbers and somehow add them to these movies like past numbers and say, oh, actually this changes the whole outlook on how these films did because of how that's just not going to happen unless there's some huge upswell that like on the level of Australia and the Beekeeper, like they suddenly realize they didn't put enough. Like that's just it would take an immense move behind one of these movies to really kind of look at them as a success in that regard. So I don't think they're looking at them in that regard. I think it is legitimately, we don't have to pay anything to make them because they're already made. We don't have to pay anything to market them because people either are going to know they're coming out or they're not. And then at that point, whatever money they make. So like the fact that it could have just made $100,000, and you know what? That's $100,000 in Disney's pocket where they didn't spend a fucking dime this time around. There's nothing to balance it against. You know what I mean? So like, I think it's the ways in which, like, you know, they put like Broadway plays into movies sometimes. You know, they do those like Fandango, like or what is it? Not Fandango.
I think it is Fandango.
No. The theatrical experiences that's done by like Fan Ticket or I forget what the name of the name of the company is. But it's that idea that like they're not putting them in theaters to make money, right? I didn't go see Tom Hiddleston in Coriolanus like because I wanted it to be the financial success that saved cinema this year, like I did when I went to go see like Barbie or Oppenheimer, right? Like that's not the goal with those releases.
Right. It's Fathom Events. That's what I have it in my head.
Yes.
So I understand, but Fandango, they're coupled with that in a weird way, but it is Fathom Events. I guess where I'm nervous about it is, let's imagine a world where Inside Out 2 does not do well, right? Then these three movies that they released beforehand, some bigwig in an office can say, Pixar movies aren't bringing people to theaters anymore, so we're just going to release them on Disney+.
I mean, the problem is that's what they were already saying. I mean, that's not new. That's just what they're already. Yeah. Disney has felt that way since Cars, which is why they forced them to make Cars 2, right? Like there's also something to be said about that. As people are talking about this, like this is like a new thing that Pixar is dealing with like their movies being more niche than expected and blah blah blah. Like no. Disney has always felt this way about Pixar. There's like books written about the ways in which Disney like hates the way that Pixar runs their business, and Pixar has only ever been able to keep doing what they do because of the unmitigated success like that they've had with their films, like, and they're slowly hitting a point where nobody's going to movies anymore, so they can't that they're not going to be able to depend on that anymore. And like there's so much to be said about like how Disney has always kind of run Pixar and felt about Pixar, and the ways in which they've kind of set Pixar up to fail. And this is not the first time that you and I have said those exact sentiments, right? Like Disney has always kind of put them in this place. I think all the way back with Soul, where we talked about the idea that rather than hold on to Soul, they just released it to streaming and just were like, good luck. And that kind of became the narrative then for Disney animated movies at that point, right? Is like they bit themselves in the ass because they treated Pixar that way, that even their own movies are now getting that same kind of like runoff, right?
Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. Everything. No, you're right about everything you're saying, but now they will have quantifiable proof. That's like, well, but Soul, when we finally released it in theaters, they're not going to look at the fact that like, well, it came out on Christmas 2020. Everybody who saw Soul has probably seen Soul, though I hate all of the words that just came out of my mouth just in terms of tenses. But and they think they're going to do the same things with something like Turning Red and with Luca if they don't have great box offices, and that scares me. Like it almost feels
I guess
like
where I'm getting caught up is you're saying if they don't, and I'm saying Disney knows they won't. This isn't them saying like we're gonna test the waters and see how you do, and if you do okay, then we'll start supporting you again. This is Disney killing Pixar.
Yeah,
We are
that is
watching
what it is.
Disney
Okay,
go
good.
out of their way to kill the whole momentum of Pixar. Like right now. I mean, of course, like the other thing to think about is like, you know, we talk about parents bringing kids to movies and how they're always looking for the opportunity to find something to bring them to. They ain't looking for 4 movies in 4 months. There's no way that the same people that make the time and the effort to bring their kids out to a film this month to go and see Soul are going to make that exact same effort 3 more times this year. That's just not going to happen. So the other thing is that in this whole process of re-releasing these movies, and part of why I wonder if they're not really pushing them marketing wise, but they are focusing on Inside Out, is like they're slowly starting to eat. They're going to slowly start eating into their audience for anybody willing to also bring their family to go see Inside Out too. Like I cannot believe that this is what they chose to do as the lead up to that release, because like they're basically once again setting Pixar up to fail.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad that we're on the same thing there, because I'm looking at it like there's someone who's like, maybe this will save Pixar. But no, it is more Disney setting them up to fail. And that's what it feels like. But also, it's also setting it up to fail because you're not wrong, right? Like everything that goes into a family trip to the movies in 2024, they're not doing it monthly like they would have done, let's say, just 10 years ago. Right?
2018, not even 10 years ago, right? Like 2018, 2019, when we were all fancy and free and Marvel was riding its high horse of it, all it had to do was say Marvel Entertainment in front of it and it would make $1 billion. Like that's, we aren't in that world anymore, right? And like, for good or for ill, you know, on the one hand, like I love the kind of opportunities that kind of safety net was giving Disney to do, you know, the ways in which they could get weird and kind of just wait and see what happens. You know, people can shit all they want over how much they hate Disney Star Wars, but we've gotten more Star Wars stuff that has hit than missed in the last 10 years than we did for 20 years before that. Right? Like it's amazing to me how much Star Wars fans want to talk about Disney killing Star Wars when they legitimately revived the franchise. Like you can argue about quality of mainline movies all you want, but at the end of the day, y'all wouldn't have Mandalorian. Like, you know, you wouldn't have Bad Batch. You wouldn't have so many of these things that Disney put the money behind because they knew that Star Wars would sell no matter what. Right? But we just don't live in that world anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, 2019, Disney had a movie every month. A new movie that was made by a studio that Disney owned was 2019. And that was such a good year for them. And it was crazy because I remember saying like, well, isn't this movie going to cannibalize the potential profits of this movie? And I had like done all that math out. And then it's like, but they don't care. They don't care about that because they're just getting money from every movie. They've already
as long as they got one or two, and as long as they've got 1 or 2 movies that make that $1 billion mark, it pays for the rest.
Right. And Endgame did that, as well as
Avatar.
Avatar was in 2019. The freaking movie that I'm thinking about, that Last Jedi sequel, the Rise of Skywalker, End of Skywalker, whatever the 9th Star Wars movie is.
Rise of the Skywalker, I believe, is the name of that one.
Yeah. Rise of Skywalker, I think, yeah. So that, like, those 2 movies coming out when they came out and both of them making $1 billion really kind of covers everything else that they did that year. You're not wrong. And then they had movies that year that also performed really well. Like Dumbo was a nice surprise for them. Mm-hmm. That was a good movie. I like Dumbo a lot. I just really wanted to talk about 2019.
No, Dumbo. Yeah, but if Dumbo came out in 2024, you know it wouldn't do well.
Yeah,
there's more than enough working against it to justify people saying I'm going to sit this one out and maybe see when it comes to streaming, and then it would be seen as a failure, right?
But let's be honest, if Dumbo did in 2024 what it did in 2019, they'd still call it a failure.
Well, that's a whole other problem too, right?
Yeah.
But like at the end of the day, like people are going to less movies, period. It just so happens to be hitting Disney the hardest because, as you pointed out, they were the ones putting the most shit out. You know, whether that's justifiable or not. I mean, they as a company couldn't like couldn't resist because everything was going to make them money, right? And that's just not how it is anymore. And so they're going to have to completely rework their entire kind of presence in the field when it comes to this stuff. That being said, I will say that I've said it before and I'll say it again. I in no way think this means that like Disney is losing their like ability to make money. Like I think that they are going to be just fine. Yes, they have to readjust how they exist in the market because the market has changed, but they've always been in that kind of place. They've always been kind of in that place of having to kind of refigure their shit out. We talk about the 90s being kind of a golden age for like Disney stuff, but we forget how weird things got for Disney with like their like Sunday evening movies and things like that, where like things were just poor quality. They became synonymous with like easily to turned out shit, and like people act like that's something new in 2020 in the 2020s, and it's like no, Disney's been known for that for 20-30 years, and they've always still been able to come out ahead. So I think they've got a handle on this. They will readjust and they will figure out a new way to make money, and they'll be just fine.
Your ability to circle around and give me the other on-ramp to a conversation topic, Sejohn, thank you. Just is beautiful. We work really well together. Because the other path I went down that I could have gone down when I started talking about Soul is, and this is an emerging thing that has just happened, so we will be following it and we will have more information once it comes to our shores. But Disney Plus has done the Max thing with the mass removal of shows and originals, like to the level of Max, like, because we know that Disney Plus, like Willow is now lost media. Some movie, I don't remember the movie, but we had discussed it before, is now lost media. They have just moved Ivan the Horrible or the Terrible Ivan. I'm not sure the name of that one. Like those are just gone, right? Mighty Ducks Game Changers, which we'll touch on a little bit later this month in our very special episode. In the UK, that is what Disney Plus did this morning, was a max level removal of their own properties from their streaming service. Mm-hmm. It hasn't come to the US yet, so it's not something that we need to worry about yet. But
I will say that the news, as far as this stuff goes, was not we're disowning this stuff to the point where you'll never see it again, but rather it's just not available now. Whereas like with the Mac stuff, they were saying we're literally burning like files so that these don't exist in order to make these tax breaks. Like in order to meet the legality of the tax breaks that we're trying to meet, this thing can never exist again. If we sell a DVD of this 10 years from now, the IRS is going to come knocking on our door. So that's just not going to happen. Whereas what Disney's doing is a lot more like their old school kind of vault shenanigans, where this is a thing going away for now, but potentially, Game Changers could be something that in 10 years we see a physical DVD release of with like a special editions, like, or something like that. Not that I'm saying like hold your breath, but at the very least, like there is that slight difference between those two that I want to make sure that we're clear on, because while in the moment paying for a streaming service, it feels exactly like what happened with Max, there is a difference in that Disney's not saying these things are gone forever, which I think is why it's happening a little bit quieter than the Max stuff did.
Yes. Well, also it's not happening in America. That's the other thing. If we turned on Disney Plus this morning in the U.S. and the number of shows that have been removed in the U.K. territory had been gone from Disney Plus here, I think you'd see a lot more noise about it. And the reason why I only bring it up is because this is an emergent story. It's something to be like just aware of as we talk about Disney trying to reconfigure themselves to be a profitable company again. And like you said, there was a time where that's what they had to do, and their solution was to make things scarce, to create a false scarcity with something like The Vault. And if they're now adding The Vault to Disney Plus, or they're taking Disney Plus and putting some of that stuff back into The Vault, that is, that's bad for the consumer. That's bad for the person who pays for Disney Plus. Because honestly,
for sure, yeah. Anybody that's paying for the streaming service definitely needs to weigh this stuff, right?
Yeah,
it's interesting in terms of like preservation, both in terms of history and physical media and all that sort of shit. That like one of the reasons that the Vault was always kind of easy to pick on, but at the end of the day, pretty widely like accepted, was because at the end of the day, like in terms of producing VHS tapes, it just wasn't viable to expect Disney to keep pumping Bambi VHS tapes out every year, right? Like that's just, like financially doesn't make sense for anybody, and like in terms of like resources didn't make sense to like be pushing people. Like if Disney were to keep releasing every movie they've ever made every year on even on streaming, the amount of server space and web traffic and all of that shit that would suddenly start to happen just by Disney alone would be untenable, right? And so, like, in a weird way, it's kind of that thing that we had been talking about more in video games, but now it's interesting to talk about now with more streaming services that's happening to the film industry, is like, we have always thought about the internet as infinite. Like, as a people, we talk about the internet as if it is this vast open expanse that is never ending, and that has simply never been the case, right? That just cannot be the case. It's why, again, back in video games speak, like the ways in which they shut down live games as service, right? The ways in which they have to shut down these MMORPGs all the time because not enough people are playing them to justify the cost of keeping the literal servers running and stuff like that. Like, so it was always kind of a false promise that everything would be available all the time from streaming services. And they did make that promise. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, we expected too much from them. No, they kept kind of acting like that was always going to be the deal, right? And as we've been talking about for the last year or two now, like, we are going to have to reckon with that. Now, we are going to have to deal with the fact that, like, we are running out of space for this shit, and we are running out of money to keep this shit running. Like, what are they going to do? Are they going to do these mass exodus, things that really hurt the consumer, or are they going to find more subtle ways to handle this stuff that doesn't make the user feel like they're getting the shit end of the stick all the time? We have seen so many people take a friggin' cudgel to these services when they don't work. We need somebody that can afford to take a scalpel. And that might be somebody like Netflix, who always seems to be the ones that figure this shit out and that everybody copies. But it might not be. For all we know, it could turn around and be Peacock that comes out on top of all this. But we are starting to see the streaming services really kind of meet their final test of if they're going to exist or not in the next year. I have a sneaking suspicion things like Paramount Plus are going to be gone by this time next year. I don't know if Peacock will be around by this time next year. Disney might be, but it's going to be a very different look to what Disney services are. I don't even know if HBO Max is even going to be around this time next year with the way shit's been going on over there, the ways in which they've combined so many different services under one roof. HBO Max already doesn't exist right now.
Yeah,
it's
HBO Max is now Max. Yeah,
right. And I don't even know if Max is going to be the name of it or if the service will even exist 12 months from now.
Yeah. I mean, now that the final season of Curb starts the night that we're recording this, once Curb Your Enthusiasm is done, I mean, why do you keep going? What is the point of? No, but seriously,
I mean, like, what's wild is I had this kind of same feeling with Game of Thrones, right? Like I remember when HBO first introduced HBO Home, right? That was like their streaming service that you could get if you had HBO Go, yeah. Right? If you had HBO, you had access to HBO Go, and then at some point they were like, hey, you can even get Go and not have to get Mac, or not even have
without
to get
having
HBO,
an HBO subscription,
right? Right, and so like
called?
that was kind of the thing that they sold it on was Game of Thrones. Like, keep up with Game of Thrones with this, right? And that was like kind of wild how much it was tied to just that. And then when when Game of Thrones ended, I kind of didn't see the point in anybody paying for an HBO service at first. And now they've combined it with enough other services and provided enough other stuff that like I can get popping in from time to time. But anybody out there that's like, yeah, I do the whole like month on, month off with that, like I totally get it, because like you can pretty much get in like a few weeks what you want from Max and then walk away for about 4 months, then come back and then get it all again, but then walk away for 4 months.
Yeah. If we didn't have it as part of our cable subscription, I don't think we would have Max independently. I mean, I'm using it right now to catch up on some things, but yeah. And it was HBO Go and then HBO Now. Those were the two forms that were then combined into HBO Max before we got rid of the HBO, just called it Max, which was also very confusing because of Cinemax. But we've done this bit before, but you're not wrong. We're going to see things change in the streaming landscape, especially with all of the discussion about Paramount being for sale over the last couple of, Max is going to buy Paramount, where it's like, I don't know what they're going to pay for it with bubble gum and taffy shards. What are you talking about? But then Paramount and Apple working together to release Argyle. That seems like such a crazy team up right there. There was another one that was Universal and someone else where I'm like, oh, that's weird that these two companies are working together. Like these little collaborations, mashups of the studios to get out a single movie. We're seeing a lot more of that now. And I think that is also pretty indicative of where the landscape is going to go.
Yeah, when even the bigwigs don't want to put all of their weight behind a thing and are willing to work with the other bigwigs in order to make it happen, that's a surefire sign of times are changing, right? Like, yeah. Because we used to talk about this, we still talk about this all the time. When if you go and see a movie and it has like 10 different production cards in front of it, it kind of is a good it's a good idea of where that movie's heading, right? If you go and see a movie and you sit through more time on production titles than you did on the trailers, then you have a kind of a sneaking suspicion about how the creators of this movie probably felt about it, right? Yeah, sure, we'll give you $100, but we're not going to give you the 100,000 you want, right? Like, it's basically the attitude there. And so seeing that kind of creeping into some of these bigger and bigger films is an interesting move.
Yeah, that's been the thing that I'm watching for. And that's what I advise other people who love media, just like on some sort of level, like Sejohn and I do, like be aware of the collaborations that you're seeing. Paramount and Apple working together for something like Argyle, and they work together a lot. Like when Coda came out, Coda was exclusive. The digital copy was an exclusive iTunes download, which seems strange to me, but they've been doing that with other films as well, where like, oh yeah, you bought this Paramount movie, but you can only on the digital, it's not Movies Anywhere, it's iTunes exclusive. Yeah. And so they've been in bed together for a while, and now that Sejohn's not wrong, Paramount Plus is probably the first one, like, in the sights for destruction. It premiered 2 weeks ago, and I thought we were going to talk about it this week. After Midnight as the replacement for James Corden is weird. Like, that was a weird choice. And I don't know, have you watched an episode yet, Sejohn?
Checked out the Paul F. Tompkins one, actually, and it was
nice.
It was a pretty good time. I mean, I was watching it commercial free. I don't know, like, if everybody has access to it that way, because I know some people are like, recording it via like live TV recordings and stuff right now because it's not necessarily at the ready, although it is up. Is it on any services yet?
It's on Paramount Plus the next day.
It's on Paramount Plus? Yeah.
And
okay. Well,
they
there you go, right?
have leaned into that. Hi, everybody who's watching this tomorrow on Paramount Plus.
I will say also, it seems to be doing okay. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that, like, it's blowing shit out of the water and is like putting James Corden in his place or any of that shit. But for what they're expecting for a midnight run on a show, people seem pretty happy with where it's at right now. Also, I mean, as good as things look, because also I think it looks like pretty fucking slick, like set wise and all that sort of stuff, and the people they've been able to get have been pretty impressive. It is at the end of the day extremely cheap to make too.
Yes.
So like, it's cheap to make, it's hitting good enough numbers for a show coming on at midnight. I think that show's probably going to stick around for at least a few more months. We'll see how if it takes off in any meaningful way, but I don't think that show's going anywhere just yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of like want to keep an eye on it, because after the first week of episodes, I wasn't, even with that Paul F. Tompkins one as like the standout. They premiered Tuesday into Wednesday instead of Monday into Tuesday, which felt a little bit weird. Like, this is our first episode, is that, and then they had 2 other episodes and then ran a rerun. Like, it didn't look like it was ready to go. And every time I've watched, it's felt a little bit more formed, which is, I mean, it took time for At Midnight, the Comedy Central show that it is essentially a carbon copy of, to get going and to be popular. But that also had the benefit of being a half-hour show, where I think After Midnight is Dancing with the Devil is the fact that it is an hour of television.
Yeah, it is, but at that point, in for a penny, in for a pound. Like the cost of doing the extra 20 minutes instead of the 22 minutes versus 42 minutes, right? Like I think at that point there's really no loss to them, because again, we're talking about 12:30 at night. Like that is dead air time on live TV. There's nothing there's nothing that they're not showing that could be making them more money. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there just isn't at this point in time. So I think in that regard, I think that it's fine that way. Like yeah, in terms of rewatchability, the episodes being a little too long can definitely eat into it if the quality is not there to keep up. Right. I didn't even realize that it was 40 minutes when I watched it. I had to remember afterwards that you had told me that it was an hour long show, like when it was on TV. I think the biggest thing about it, like the at midnight thing that I think that the overshadows some of it is going to disappear really quickly because I don't know how much at midnight you watched, but it it feels like it's a show in the same genre, but it does not feel like the same show. And a lot of that is because when At Midnight was on, was so Twitter oriented. Like literally one of the rounds on At Midnight, I think every episode was them then writing tweets to go out while the show was on, and then them like using reactions to those tweets later in the episode as part of the game and stuff like that. That whole element just doesn't exist anymore and shouldn't exist and can't really exist anymore because there's just not enough people on Twitter, especially the kind of people that are into Taylor Tomlinson.
Taylor Tomlinson. Yep.
Yeah, and like her like and the After Midnight whole crowd and stuff like that. Like X just isn't going to cover that shit for them, right? Like Twitter X is just not the place for them anymore. So like growing away from that has already made it such a different show. The hour long format's made it such a different show. The style of comedy, because the other thing is just like, I don't know anybody out there that is still following Chris Hardwick and his style of like weird like nerd. Aren't I so nerdy humor, despite the fact that he makes millions of dollars and like wears like designer clothes, but no, he's a real nerd, guys. He really swears. Like that whole personality that was really big 5 years ago. Like people don't play with that shit anymore. Like that's just not the vibe of it anymore, right? Like At Midnight was the kind of show that Elon Musk probably would have shown up as a contestant on at some point, right? I don't think that'll ever happen on After Midnight.
Yeah. I mean, the real reason why I was interested in even watching it when I heard it was coming was because of the hashtag wars and the fact that was such a big part of At Midnight for me at the time because of how big Twitter was, specifically Twitter in 2014. And then to watch it, and the hashtag wars still happen, but now it's across everything. You can share hashtag wars everywhere, which is strange. And then that one step further where like it's not the same type of humor, it feels like the hashtag wars before, like it feel like it was a narrow sort of topic that they would give, and now they seem very, very broad. And also, like, if you just saw the hashtag, you might not know that it's an After Midnight game.
Yeah.
Like it's interesting. It's been an interesting watch. I don't hate it like in the morning as a way to like wake up as something in the background. It's kind of, non-offensive. It doesn't usually get my blood boiling, but I don't feel alone in the morning if I have it on in the background. But
yeah. No, it is inoffensive, I think is the best way of putting it, which is exactly why it's the perfect kind of late night show in that regard, right? It's the kind of thing that you have on if you're working third shift, or if sitting at a bar, or if you're there isn't anything coming on at midnight that is must see TV, right? That's just not the way that it exists. Not even SNL, the king of late night like television, is that anymore. SNL doesn't even really qualify as must see TV for a lot of people nowadays, right? So surely this during the week show is just not aiming for that kind of audience either. So like, in that regard, what they are doing there is doing a lot more like highlighting new types of comedians and things like that. And they're leaning into like just how silly can we get. It's an interesting space for them to kind of experiment with. And I think the show will be better if they keep leaning into the experimentation. I like the episode that I saw. A lot of it was because it was kind of unexpected and new from what I had seen from the older version of the show, that they are slowly kind of just not even that anymore. So like if they can keep on that path, I think they've got a pretty good like handle I think they've got a pretty good space to do something really cool, and so far, I don't think that they've dropped the ball yet. That being said, this shit comes and goes. Like, we could find out tomorrow that they're canceling this thing just for tax reasons, right? Like, quality doesn't dictate anything nowadays. So
yeah, I mean, everything you're talking about in terms of like success, I agree with, but those are not the measures of success in the C-suite at Paramount or at CBS. So like that's the thing.
But like you're talking about this show like it's like a primetime show that needs to do things. Like, I just don't think that a show that comes on at midnight, like, I bet you that half the people in C-suite didn't even know that oh, I thought we just aired the American flag after 11. What? Like, what are we doing?
Well, yes, but I mean, there are those people who's like, if we put a Blue Bloods rerun on, we'll make more money than
No, you
this.
won't.
I mean,
That's
you say that,
and
but
I'm saying that I don't think that's true. I turn off Blue Bloods. If I'm sitting in a bar, you know what I don't want to be watching while is Blue Bloods. You know what I would watch? A game show of any kind.
Of any kind, right? Because it's something. At least it's something. I guess what I'm saying is, and this is a call to everybody who's listening. First of all, if you're aware of After Midnight, let us know. If this is the first time you've heard about it, let us know. But also, if you are aware of it, are you seeing any of the clips or bits from After Midnight like show up on your social media or are being recommended on YouTube? Because
the biggest indicator that things are going okay, it has nothing to do with the show itself or engagement or anything like that, sharing clips or jokes or any of that shit. Although I do see some stuff come up in shorts, but even that, it is how many ads they are still able to show. Like, that show cuts to an ad every 5 minutes. And as long as they can keep doing that, CBS ain't going anywhere.
CBS is not going to be upset about it. That's true. But I know that the reason why James Corden became what James Corden was at the end was because of its ability to live on YouTube and things like that. And like, really, that's what late night TV has become, is a YouTube 3-minute video factory.
Right, but you understand that's exactly why he's not around anymore.
Yes.
Because that was the only place
yes,
he was.
He wasn't being watched at the time. They weren't making.
So
yeah.
I would argue that a show that isn't getting that kind of reaction is probably more appealing to them.
Oh, I would hope so, but I don't want it to be them wanting their cake and eat it too. So that's
if they turn around and go, it wasn't doing as well as we wanted it to do in the metrics that we were holding James Corden to, then fuck off, CBS. Like, you canceled him because what was going on there was not viable anymore for TV. So having a show that is doing nothing like that and then saying, well, we canceled it because it wasn't enough like James Corden would be the stupidest move.
Yep, but we all know how TV executives work, Sejohn. I'm not to be that guy, but they're not always known for their intelligence. I have one more thing that I want to bring up brief. Is there anything else that you want to talk about before we send this one off? Anything we failed to touch on?
Oh, let's do it.
All right. So I said that I would talk about Extended Family after 4 episodes. And it's late in the episode, so I'm telling you, I'm not going to be doing that this episode. And mostly it's because I haven't watched any Extended Family since those first 4 episodes, and it is all blank in my mind. I know that I didn't feel great about the show after 4 episodes, but I would like to have a discussion. I'd like to have one of those Devon Decker semi-oral histories of a show still in progress moments. So here's what I'm telling you. Here's the promise. I'm going to rewatch the first 4 episodes of Extended Family before our next recording of an episode proper. And
just to remind everybody, this is the John Cryer project.
Yeah, this
right?
is John Cryer, Abigail Spencer, Donald Faison, and
Did you say your name like that on purpose? Is that how you say your name?
No. It's John Cryer, Abigail Spencer, Donald Faison. They're sort of the big 3 of the series. Was that?
Spencer.
Abigail Spencer. So yeah. So I will rewatch them and make sure that I am as insane as possible when I talk about it, because the show literally drives me insane. There is one moment that I am thinking of right now in those first 4 episodes that had me laughing my ass off, and honestly, I don't think they expected it to be as good as it was. It seems like
not because of what they put on screen, but because of some circumstances in your life maybe that made it funny.
Circumstances in my life that made it funny, just like the work that the actors in the scene were putting in, and possibly the fact that it was not John Cryer, Donald Faison, or Abigail Spencer. So sorry, Abigail Spencer. I love you in Timeless. I love you in Suits.
No, this is more about us talking for 2 hours and getting to this point.
And being a little like
with
punchy. And also not having talked for these 2-hour sessions for 2 weeks. So, like you kind of forget how to end one of these. But I am telling you, next episode, our 369th episode of the Say Report, I will go insane on Extended Family. Just the first 4 episodes. So, like, I don't love to give homework to the people, but, like, if you want to fully understand the breadths of depravity that my mind is going to plumb, next episode of the Say Report related to Extended Family, you might want to watch the first 4 episodes.
Well, and if we're gonna just give little teasers and tastes, then there is something that I am curious to hear about next episode that I want to give everybody else an opportunity to kind of bone up on, not necessarily play because of some stuff, but some Silent Hill stuff has been going on, and the only reason I'm even bringing it up is because you reached out to me about it with some questions. And I then in turn have some questions for you. Well, so there is a PT-esque Silent Hill demo out currently, right? Like that was part of the deal. On PS5, is it also on Xbox or is it just PS5?
It is only on PS5. It's a PS5
it doesn't surprise me. It was
yeah.
Silent Hill was always a PlayStation baby, so that doesn't surprise me. But you always have to ask nowadays, right?
Nope, I understood. I mean, if it were available for you anyway, I would. Yeah, the fact that it's a PS5
at the very least, check out some of the reveal stuff that's come out on it. See, there's been a couple of write-ups on it that have been challenging. And I'm curious to hear Devon's thoughts on it, but also this is a good opportunity to say that next time I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with Silent Hill, because I am the roller coaster that series has always had in the public eye continues. Let's put it that way.
So, I mean, if you're out there looking for it and you have access to a PS5, it is Silent Hill: The Short Message. It is a free-to-play game. It is PS5 exclusive. You do not even need to be like a PlayStation Plus person. It is just available for free to everybody, and that's insane. It's insane that they did that. And I am telling everybody to download it now, in case it is systematically removed from downloads the way that PT was.
Yeah. Well, and that's where the PT stuff I think really begins and ends, right? Is that's exactly what happened with PT, and that really blew everybody's mind when they did it that time. But in that being said, like it's not like a continuous ever running hallway or anything like that, right?
No, it is. It seems to have some sort of narrative. I haven't played it yet. I will admit that. I asked you if you had a PS5, because if you did, then I would have said, let's both play this.
And this is related to the Silent Hill 2 re-release, right? Or is this a separate thing?
I don't know. I mean, it's the Silent Hill 2 re-release is coming.
Yeah, good. No.
But I will say, Short Message looks very much like it is stationed in modern times. Text messaging is a huge part in the trailer for it, the reveal trailer. So I don't know if Silent Hill 2 will now be.
If they're not related, then we'll have even more to talk.
Cool.
So let's leave it there.
So we'll have that. Yeah. So Extended Family and Silent Hill: The Short Message are definitely going to be talked about next week. Also, we did a time capsule episode for it, so I'd like to end with a bit of a celebration. Sejohn, we officially now have 2 more episodes of the Say Report proper than there are available episodes of American Dad.
Another one down, and another one down.
And another one bites the... No. I mean, they have a bunch of, like, episodes that have probably been made. Titles have been revealed, but there was a time there where, because of their hiatuses and how it was working with TBS, I always felt like we were so close to their number, but it was always like just out of reach. Like they had 3 more episodes. And with Into the Multiverse, Into the Jingleverse, that was the name of the episode, airing as the 366th episode for Christmas last year. They haven't aired another one since. And honestly, I know that Seth was not having people work during the writer strike or the SAG-AFTRA stuff. So, yeah. That's the other thing about the Oscars. I mean, we're probably going to talk about the Oscars once there are winners, but it feels really strange that almost everything is stuff that came out pre the writers' pandemic, as you call it. So there's stuff there too. But I mean, I think that's all for me. I drank a full cream soda right at the start of this. I could probably hit the restroom. But is there anything else?
Nah.
No. Okay.
Hey, there you go, everybody. Here's your official bathroom break of the episode right at the end.
Okay, so we are working on the Discord. If you would like to get an invite to join us in the Discord, the best way to do that right now as we try to get all of our ducks in a row is to send us an email. It's thesayreport@gmail.com. That's thesayreport@gmail.com. We'll send you an invite to the Discord, and you can talk with other people who listen, and you can talk with us. Or you can just send your thoughts and things to thesayreport@gmail.com. Still checking it, and as always, if it's for me or for Sejohn, make sure you put the corresponding name in the subject line.
All right.
Yeah. But without anything further, Sejohn, it was lovely to see you, my friend, and Will, please bring us home.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devon Decker and Sejohn Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.